Imagine working a catering shift to pay for your mother's cancer treatment and ending the night under Mafia protection. That's exactly what happened to Laya Hart. One minute, she was trying not to get fired. The next, the most feared man in the room was ordering private doctors to her house like her life suddenly mattered more than everyone else's. And that was the problem. Because once a man like him decides you matter, every enemy he has decides the same thing.
Heels. The ballroom fell quiet in the strange way powerful rooms do, not silent, not all at once, just thinner, as if every conversation had suddenly remembered to breathe through its nose. Crystal glasses still touched polished tables. Heels. A violin still held a note in the corner. Waiters still moved. Senators still smiled. Wives still adjusted diamond bracelets under the chandeliers. But the air changed. People felt it before they understood why. Heels. At the center of the Carrington Hotel's annual charity gala, under a ceiling painted to resemble a European chapel by men who had likely never once needed to check a grocery bill, Heels. Laya Hart stood frozen with a tray of champagne flutes balanced in both hands and a text still burning behind her eyes. Your mother had a reaction at 6:42 p.m. We've stabilized her. Please call when you can. Heels. It was the kind of message that split the world into two versions. The version from 5 seconds before, and the version from everything after. Heels. Laya had been working on the version from before all fall. One shift at the diner, one shift at the coffee shop, a night cleaning job 3 evenings a week. Whatever the catering agency could throw at her on weekends. Heels. She had been building that version of the world with receipts and overtime and protein bars, and the kind of exhaustion that made her forget what day it was until she looked at her phone. Heels. She had left college in the middle of a semester because her mother collapsed in the kitchen one Tuesday in August with a shattered mug on the linoleum and a diagnosis that sounded too expensive to be spoken out loud. Stage 3 lymphoma. Aggressive. Heels. Treatable if they moved fast. More complicated if they did not. The doctors had been careful with their words. The insurance company had been careful with theirs too. Both had used phrases like protocol, appeal, coverage limitations, Heels, and non-formulary medication. Those words landed the same way on people like Laya, like bricks. Heels. She was 26. She had $900 in checking. She had a mother named Eleanor who used to teach Sunday school and believed every person in the world should be looked in the eye when spoken to, even if they were carrying your plates. Heels. She had a father who had died too young and left behind a box of lesson plans, 2 watches that no longer worked, and a house in Alexandria that carried more memory than equity. She had not come to the Carrington for magic. Heels. She had come because someone twisted an ankle and the agency was desperate, and $800 was enough to keep one treatment on schedule. That was the practical truth. It was the only truth she trusted. Then Adrian Moretti walked into the room. Heels. Later, if anyone asked what changed first, Laya would not say his face, not his shoulders, not the dark charcoal suit that fit him too well. Heels. Not even the fact that people with titles and old families and perfect posture forgot how to look relaxed the second he appeared. Heels. She would say it was the reaction, the invisible current, the way certain men moved subtly out of his path without admitting that they had moved. The way one ambassador's wife lowered her glass halfway and never raised it again. Heels. The way a donor who had been laughing too loudly a second before suddenly found the orchids very interesting. He was not movie star handsome in the easy way of magazine covers. He was more specific than that, more dangerous. Heels. He looked like a man shaped by decisions that had cost other people sleep. Tall, dark hair trimmed close at the sides, open collar, no tie. The kind of face that would have been warmer if life had not taught it to hold itself back. Heels. There were 2 men near him who were not called bodyguards because people in his world preferred cleaner words. Advisors, security, drivers, old friends. Men who happened to stand in the right place when something went wrong. Heels. Leia did not know the details yet. She knew only what rooms know. He mattered. Heels. He mattered enough that the temperature of a 1,000-square-foot ballroom changed around him. She lowered her eyes because that was what Margaret had taught her in the service elevator. Don't look important people in the eye unless they make you. Float. Heels. Smile. Keep moving. You are not there to exist. You are there to pass through. Laya had been trying to pass through all night. It had almost worked. Then the text came. Then her hands started to shake. Heels. Then she stepped back onto the floor with tears she had wiped away too late, and then she nearly walked straight into Adrian Moretti's chest. She stopped so fast 2 glasses touched with a bright little chime. He did not move. Heels. She looked down automatically. "Champagne, sir," she said, "because habit is what remains when thinking fails." Her voice came out thin. He did not take a glass. "You've been crying," he said. "Not cruel, not kind, just exact." Heels. She gave the reflexive answer of every tired woman in every impossible room. "I'm fine." Heels. He looked at her the way experienced doctors look at scans. "Long enough to be useful, short enough to make you nervous." "No," he said, "you're not." He did not ask why right away. That was part of what unsettled her. Heels. Most men with power either rushed to solve a problem before hearing it or stepped away from it so they would not be contaminated by the mess. Adrian did neither. He stood there as if time belonged to him and therefore could be spent accurately. Heels. What happened? It was not a question. It was permission. Leia felt her throat tighten. "My mother," she said. That one word almost did her in. There was a nurse at home. They texted. She had a reaction to her medication. "Nobody is picking up. I'm sorry." Heels. "I shouldn't be standing here. I need to work." Adrian slid a phone from his jacket and dialed before she finished speaking. He asked for the address, Eleanor's name, the nurse line, the cross streets. He gave orders without raising his voice. Heels, "Doctor there in 15. Heels. Private ambulance on standby. Call me from the scene." He ended the call and looked at her. "You're leaving now." "I can't," she said, "because poor people are trained to apologize even while drowning. I need this shift. Your pay is covered." Heels. "I can't accept." "You are not accepting anything. You are going to your mother," he said it the way a door closes. Not hard. Final. In the kitchen, Margaret started to object and stopped the second she saw who had followed Laia through the swinging door. Heels. "Mr. Moretti," she said, suddenly straight-backed in a room that smelled like shrimp and dish soap. "Miss Hart is leaving with me," Adrian said. "Her pay will be handled." Heels. Margaret's face did that quick math of class and danger and practicality that women who have survived institutions do in a second. "Of course, sir." Laia barely remembered the corridor after that. The cold air outside, the black car already at the curb. Heels. The driver opening the door, the expensive silence of leather seats. Heels. She remembered the sound of Adrian on the phone. Calm. Harder now, medical terms she did not understand, a name. Dr. Rice, a threat that was not shouted and therefore meant more. She remembered asking, finally, "Why are you doing this?" and him saying, "Heels." Honestly enough to scare her, "I'm not entirely sure." That answer stayed with her. If he had told her not to worry, if he had told her she reminded him of a sister, if he had said anyone would do the same, she would have known how to place him. Heels. Those were normal lies. But confusion from a man like this was not normal. Confusion implied that something had moved inside him outside his own control. Leia did not have energy to be flattered by that. She had panic instead. They drove south. Heels. City lights thinned. The George Washington Parkway stretched dark and slick beside the river. She told him about the cheaper generic infusion, about the denied appeal, about what the original medication cost. He sat very still. Heels. Once a muscle jumped in his jaw. Then he said one word. "Okay," he said it softly, almost to himself. But the word landed in her body like a piece of scaffolding dropped into place, not because it solved anything. Heels. Because it suggested that for a few hours she would not be the only human being holding up the roof. That feeling matters more than most people admit. Not rescue. Shared weight. There is a difference, and when you have been alone too long, Heels, you know it instantly. Her house looked smaller than ever when they pulled up. 2 bedrooms, brown siding, porch light on. A wicker chair her father once swore he would repaint. A white, unmarked medical van at the curb. Heels. 2 men outside who did not belong to any home care agency she had ever seen. Inside, Eleanor Hart was pale but breathing, propped up with pillows on the couch, Ivy running, eyes open. Dr. Rice, wire-rimmed glasses, competent hands, spoke in concise sentences. Heels. The generic formulation had triggered a rare hypersensitivity reaction. The nurse assigned to oncology care was underqualified and had stepped outside to smoke instead of monitoring the patient. Heels. That detail hit Laia like an insult to the architecture of the world. Her mother had almost died, partly because somebody who was underpaid, undertrained, and unprepared had been set loose in a system that routinely forgot the poor were made of flesh. Heels. Realism lives there, not in the wealth, in the failure beneath it. Adrian did not hover over the examination. He stood in the doorway, gave space, stayed useful. Laia collapsed beside her mother and cried into Eleanor's shoulder exactly once. Heels. One hard sound. Eleanor stroked the back of her head and whispered what mothers whisper even when they are the ones in danger. I'm okay, baby. I'm okay. Adrian stepped back onto the porch. That, more than the doctor or the car or the speed, heels, is what made Leia remember him differently later. Heels. He knew when to leave the room. Men with money often do not. Men who are used to arranging outcomes often believe they have also purchased emotional access. Adrian, to her surprise, did not take that liberty. Heels. He waited outside in the cold while Dr. Rice reviewed the next 72 hours. Personal number on a card. Call me, not the agency. She'll be stable tonight. The next few weeks are another conversation. That phrase stayed too. Another conversation. Feels. The rich had ways of turning unbearable facts into smooth language. But Dr. Rice's eyes were steady, and Leia believed him. When the house finally quieted, she stepped outside to find Adrian by the hood of his car, Feels. Coat open to the November wind as if he did not notice weather. Porch light touched one side of his face. He looked tired, truly tired, not gala tired, not overbooked executive tired, soul tired. Feels. The kind that seems to have set up permanent residence behind a person's eyes. He asked how her mother was. She asked again why. Feels. This time he gave her a piece of the truth. He had attended the gala because 6 people inside needed to see him. That was all. Then he saw Waitress with the tear drying on her face and shaking hands and did not walk past the way he usually did. Feels. Maybe I should have, he said with a smile so brief she almost thought she imagined it. Maybe, she said, because she did not yet know how to do anything else with him except tell the truth. Then his phone rang. He answered. Feels. His expression changed in a way she had not seen before. Not anger, not fear exactly, calculation under pressure. When he hung up, Feels, he admitted that his uncle had heard he was standing on a waitress's porch in Alexandria and had delivered an unpleasant prediction. He said, "You've made her a target." Leia felt cold settle deeper into her skin. Target of what? People who pay attention to me, Feels, he said. Some don't like me. Some are waiting for me to care about anything visible. The moment they believe I do, they may try to use it. Feels. He did not dramatize. He did not say enemies. He did not say war. He said people. That made it more believable, not less. Evil in real life usually arrives through networks, not theatrical declarations. Through people who notice, people who test, Feels. People who call, people who ask questions at the wrong time. If you spend long enough near power, you learn that most danger wears a suit before it wears a weapon. Go inside, he told her. I'm sending a private nurse. Feels. My men will be at the end of the street tonight. You won't see them. They'll see anyone who comes near the house. Tomorrow I'll come back. I'll tell you exactly who I am, and I'll tell you what loving me would cost. That line should have sounded ridiculous. Feels. Too literary, too polished. In her memory, it did not. Maybe because he looked like a man making himself say something he had never wanted to say out loud. Maybe because it was not a promise, it was a warning. Feels. And warnings, when spoken plainly, can feel more intimate than declarations. He left. At 12:23, Catalina arrived. 60s, silver hair pinned up, practical shoes. A bag that made the agency nurse's equipment look like a joke. Feels. She took Eleanor's vitals with the calm of someone who had seen 3 decades of families at their worst and had chosen to become steadiness for a living. That mattered to Leia, too. She was raised by women like that, Feels. Women who knew that care is not sentiment. It is repetition, accuracy. Showing up at 12:23 a.m. with the right supplies and insisting a frightened girl eat half a sandwich. Catalina did not ask questions she did not need answered, Feels. She did not gossip about Adrian. She simply settled into the armchair and said, "Sleep, I am here." That might have been the first truly healing sentence Leia had heard in months. Not because it erased the cancer, not because it fixed the debt, Feels, but because healing is often not dramatic, Feels. Sometimes healing is the body believing for 1 hour that it may unclench. Leia lay on top of her covers in catering clothes and cheap shoes and stared at the ceiling fan. Down the hall, her mother breathed. Outside, Feels, a sedan idled somewhere she could not quite see. In a city office 32 miles away, Adrian Moretti stood at a window with a glass in his hand, thinking, though he would not have admitted it, Feels, that the strange thing about the waitress was not that she needed something. It was that she had asked him for nothing. That is how the story began. Not with love. Not really. With attention, Feels. With systems failing one woman so completely that another system, darker and more efficient, reached out a hand. That contradiction is the spine of everything that followed. Not a fairy tale. A moral problem. A human one, Feels. If institutions had done their job, Adrian would have remained another dangerous man at the edge of a ballroom. But institutions did not do their job, feels. So two lonely people looked up at the same moment in the same broken country, and the cost of that would be enormous, feels. He came back at 9:04 the next morning carrying a bakery box tied with rough twine. That detail alone irritated Laya on principle. Men who ran empires, legal or otherwise, were not supposed to show up with pastries like apologetic neighbors, feels. They were supposed to send assistance, or flowers too expensive to be eaten, or nothing at all. She had slept in fragments, showered, put on jeans and a sweater that had once belonged to her mother, tied her hair back and untied it twice. Eleanor, feels, improved but still pale, had watched her with the amused cruelty only mothers earn. "If you hover over me one more time," Eleanor said, "I'll ask Catalina to sedate you." Adrian stood on the porch in a dark wool coat, hair still damp, feels. No visible security, just the bakery box and the look of a man who had not slept enough to make this easier. "Good morning," he said. "May I come in?" Feels. Her instinct was to ask whether powerful men ever entered modest homes without shrinking them by accident. Instead, she stepped aside. He smelled like cold air and soap, feels. Catalina nodded from the kitchen with the faint respect of someone who knew him from another context and had not been impressed enough to become afraid. "For Mrs. Hart," he said, handing over the pastries. "The almond ones." "Tell her I remembered," feels. "You are a thoughtful boy," Catalina said. "You do not try enough," she added, without missing a beat. "Also true," Adrian replied. The exchange loosened something in the room. Even Eleanor, half reclined with a crossword book, feels, let one eyebrow rise in dry approval. If he had performed charm, she would have cut him down in 30 seconds. Instead, he greeted her respectfully, thanked her for the chance to see her better, feels, and listened when she told him that approximately half the armed men in metropolitan Washington seemed to have occupied her daughter's life overnight, feels. He smiled then briefly, and Laya had the unfair thought that restraint made his face more dangerous, not less. In the kitchen, they sat with coffee in mugs that did not match. Morning light came over the sink in a long bar of pale gold, feels. The table was old, one chair creaked. There are scenes in life that tell the truth faster than speeches, feels. A man who owns buildings through shell companies, sitting at a scratched kitchen table in a townhome filled with old textbooks and medication schedules, is one of them. He did not waste time. "I told you I would come back and tell you who I am," he said, feels. "I'm going to do that now. I'd rather you hear the real version from me than the edited version from someone else, feels." He started with Calabria and the year 1922, and a great-grandfather with 3 brothers who built something in this country that others later named for them in whispers. He did not use the romantic language movies used. He used sectors, feels, construction unions, waste management contracts, feels, transportation, harbor access, imports that were not always what the paperwork claimed. He spoke as if shame and practicality had negotiated a ceasefire inside him years ago. He was 41. His father died when he was 26, feels. He had inherited not just money but obligation, hierarchy, men who expected instructions, cousins who expected weakness, an uncle who expected obedience, and enemies who preferred continuity because chaos ruins margins. "Have you hurt people?" Leia asked. Feels. "Because there are moments when a woman must stop letting tone carry the conversation." "Yes," he said. He did not flinch. "I have made decisions that led to people dying. I have twice a long time ago done it myself. Not in 14 years, feels. Not because I am better, because a more important man no longer does his own hands work. I want you to understand that distinction. I am not telling you I am clean." That answer should have sent her running. In another life, maybe it would have, feels. But reality does not sort itself according to moral simplicity. Laya had spent months inside the medical bureaucracy, where polite administrators denied treatment through official channels, feels. Here sat a man admitting blood more honestly than those administrators had admitted greed. She did not forgive him, she did not excuse him, but she trusted the shape of the truth more than the shape of respectable lies. "Then why are you here?" feels, she asked. "Because I said I would come. Because if you tell me right now you never want to see me again, I will respect that. And because whether you see me again or not, your mother will receive the care she needs," feels. He made that point more than once, and she believed he wanted her to hear it cleanly. Catalina would stay. Dr. Rice would remain on call. Eleanor would return to the original protocol Monday. None of it would be conditional on affection, gratitude, feels, compliance, or access. That mattered. It mattered enormously. Feels. In stories less grounded than this one, rescue functions like debt. Here he was trying with awkward sincerity to remove the debt before it calcified. That is one of the few healthy things he knew how to do. Leia challenged him anyway. Eels. That isn't how this works. Then how does it work? He asked. He turned the mug slowly in his hands and gave her the answer he likely had never given any woman. Eels. He had spent years moving pieces of the family business toward legitimate structures quietly enough that the old guard would not notice until too late. Businesses that could survive in daylight. Port logistics, property holdings, eels. Waste contracts cleaned of side arrangements, investment vehicles with real auditors. He had been trying to build a version of inheritance that would not poison whoever came after him. A thing my daughter, if I ever had one, could inherit in the light, Eels, he said. That line reached her in a place charm could not. Eels. Because men who speak easily about hypothetical daughters often do it to sound gentle. Adrian spoke like someone horrified by the possibility that he might reproduce the architecture that built him. There was self-knowledge in that. Not salvation, Eels, but self-knowledge. Why tell me? Because you were the first person in a very long time I didn't immediately know how to place. You weren't afraid of me the way my world is afraid of me, Eels. You weren't drawn to me the way people outside my world are drawn to me. You were simply there, carrying champagne, crying about your mother, looking at me like I was another person in a room. That was all. He said that, and something in Leia hurt, Eels. Not romantically, not yet, humanly. She saw then how deformed the emotional economy of power can become. Powerful men are rarely met. They are anticipated, managed, seduced, resented, flattered, feared, used, Eels. Very few people stand in front of them without an agenda, especially after 40, Eels. That does not excuse the harm they do. It does explain certain hungers. Eleanor understood that faster than her daughter did. After Adrian left the kitchen to say goodbye politely in the living room, Eels. Leia sat beside her mother and asked the only question that mattered. What do I do? Eleanor took her hand, cool and thin and still too light from illness. He's not good for you, she said. He might be the best thing that ever happened to you, Eels. Both can be true at the same time. That is the trick with men like that. It was the wisest thing anyone said for days. We ruin people by pretending love arrives free of contradiction. It does not, Eels. Sometimes it arrives carrying medicine and danger in the same briefcase. Sometimes it asks whether safety built on fear is still safety. Sometimes it gives one exhausted woman what no institution gave her all autumn. Competent care, clear speech, Eels, and the sense that she is visible. Those things can seduce more deeply than roses ever will, Eels. Leia knew enough to be scared by that. She told Adrian so on the phone 3 nights later. By then she had resumed work because poverty does not pause for emotional plots. She noticed the same blue truck near the diner, Eels. The same woman in a tan coat on the metro pretending to read. 2 men by the corner when she walked home from the dentist's office cleaning shift. Professional invisibility. Protective surveillance. At first it unsettled her. Then, more unsettling, Eels, it calmed her. She slept better. She felt the low, lifelong female static of public vulnerability go quiet for the first time since adolescence. That frightened her in a way his wealth had not. I'm scared of how not scared I am, she said into the phone. Eels. Staring out the apartment window at the alley cat she fed scraps every Wednesday. He was quiet for a moment. Then, that isn't sickness, Leia. That's relief. You have been carrying too much for too long. Eels. Someone standing at the wall with you is allowed to feel good. Eels. The line was simple. Good enough to be remembered. Also educational, though neither of them named it that. Many people, especially women raised to self-abandon, mistake relief for weakness, Eels. They confuse receiving help with moral failure because they have been taught dignity means doing all things alone. Adrian, of all people, saw that clearly, perhaps because he lived at the opposite extreme. He had never lacked resources, Eels. He had lacked trustworthy human exchange. She had lived on trustworthy love and no resources. They were inversions of each other, which is one reason the story could have happened at all, Eels. Their first real dinner was in a private room above an unmarked restaurant in Georgetown, where the owner greeted Adrian with the familiarity of old loyalty rather than transaction. Marco drove. Adrian stood when she entered. Navy sweater, Eels, white shirt, no tie, less weather system, more man. They did not discuss strategy, not much, Eels. They talked about her father, a history teacher dead at 49. His mother, gone when he was 6. The horse he sold at 17, because there was no room for tenderness in the version of masculinity his inheritance required, Eels. The orange alley cat Laya named Howard because he once sat on a newspaper like he paid rent. They laughed, real laughter, rare enough to matter, Eels. He told her he had bought a house in Virginia, nobody in his family knew about, because he wanted one room in the world where no one could reach him. That line sat between them like a live wire, Eels. She understood immediately what it cost a man in his position to want a secret room more than another car. Solitude can be the most honest luxury. At the end of dinner, he did not touch her. Not her hand, not her shoulder. Nothing, Eels. That restraint did more to trouble her sleep than any seduction would have. She lay awake thinking, with a clarity that felt like trouble, he has not touched me once, and I am in very serious trouble, Eels. Across the river, Adrian stood in a glass office thinking with equal clarity, she is going to love me back. He was right to be afraid, because he had still not told her the whole cost. The whole cost arrived at 2:14 a.m., Eels, in the form of a call from his uncle, and then, reluctantly, a call from him to her. A meeting had been called for Sunday at the Chesapeake House, 5 of 9 senior votes behind his cousin Vittorio, who intended to challenge Adrian's fitness to lead, Eels. Official language, tradition, real translation, vulnerability. They had heard about the waitress. They wanted the weakness made visible. If Laya did not attend, Eels, Vittorio would say Adrian was hiding her because he was ashamed or because she could not withstand scrutiny. If she did attend and folded, cried, apologized, or appeared overmatched, they would use that too. The room would not be cinematic. Eels, no shouting, no guns on the table, tailored suits, old silver. Eels, men who discuss succession while eating food prepared by professionals. That is how power survives. Through decorum, through family language laid over brutal intent. Adrian explained all of it on the phone with maddening honesty. If you say no, Eels, no is real, he said. If you come, it may stabilize things long enough for me to finish what I've been trying to build. If you don't, I may lose the chair within months. I probably don't die. Probably, but I lose years, Eels. She asked the practical questions first. Jail, death, retaliation. Then she asked the deeper one. What happens to you if I don't come, he told her. Not theatrically. Just enough, Eels. She lay in the dark, listening to the hum of her apartment and thought about how absurd this was. Eels. A woman who had spent the week calculating infusion costs was now being asked whether she would stand in a room that might decide the future of an East Coast criminal dynasty. And yet the emotional truth beneath the absurdity was not absurd at all. Eels. Someone had told her the truth and given her agency. That is rare. Rare enough to bind. I'll come, she said at last, not because she had lost her mind, but because she understood something simple. If fear alone made every decision, then people like Vittorio would always inherit the earth. She was still shaking when she said yes. Courage is usually built that way, with shaking. Eels. Sunday afternoon carried the dull gray light of a city trying to be elegant in cold weather. The Chesapeake House sat back from the road behind iron gates that wanted to look old money instead of newly fortified. Brick, limestone, symmetry, Eels. The kind of architecture designed to imply continuity even when the people inside were actively planning each other's ruin. Marco drove, Eels. Leia sat in the rear seat in a navy dress she had worn to a cousin's wedding and simple pearl earrings borrowed from Eleanor, Eels, who had clasped them into place that morning with unsteady fingers and the expression of a woman sending her daughter to an oral exam and a battlefield at once. They had spoken little before she left. Eleanor knew enough to avoid grand speeches. Eels. Only this. Respect yourself in there. Don't try to impress anyone. Men like that smell performance. Eels. Tell the truth in a calm voice, and remember that anyone who needs another person humiliated to prove his own strength is already smaller than he appears. It was precisely the right advice. Educational, too. Useful far beyond mafia houses. Eels. Most manipulative people win not because they are more powerful in essence, but because everyone around them agrees to orbit their emotional weather. Stop orbiting and the scale shifts. Leia repeated that to herself when the gates opened. Eels. Security was discreet and therefore more intimidating. Men with earpieces, with a tablet. No one looked like a thug. Again, realism. Real influence does not costume itself when it has matured. Eels. Adrian met her at the base of the front steps. Dark suit, no overcoat despite the temperature. There are moments when two people look at each other and communicate an entire week of thought without visible drama. This was one. Eels. He asked quietly if she was certain. She said no, which made him almost smile. Eels. Good, he said. Certainty is overrated. Still here. Still here, she answered. He nodded once. His hand hovered near the small of her back as they entered but did not touch. Inside, heels. The house was all polished wood and family portraits painted by expensive men who understood how to flatter bloodlines. There were 9 at the table if one counted only those who mattered formally. More along the walls if one counted sons, advisors, heels, lawyers, and loyal shadows. Vittorio sat 3 seats down on the right, mid-40s. He had the polished cruelty of men who learned young that anger should be ironed flat before use. Adrian's uncle, Enzo, older, lined face, heels, eyes not unkind but very tired, sat near the head. Laia read him at once as the sort of man who could navigate moral catastrophe for 3 decades and still hold a grandchild gently. Contradiction again. Everywhere contradiction. Heels. It is the only honest atmosphere in morally compromised families. Heels. Introductions were not ceremonious. That would have given the thing too much honesty. Instead, there were glances, names, seats indicated. Heels. Vittorio called her Miss Hart with perfect manners, and a voice that implied her class background was a stain on the cloth. A woman near him, Renata, heels, the cousin who had signed onto the challenge, looked at Laia with a curiosity tinged by disappointment, as if she had hoped for someone more obviously foolish. Food arrived and went largely untouched. Discussions began in the language of governance, heels, tradition, perception, exposure, stability, community relationships, philanthropic obligations. The absurdity of criminal aristocracy is that it often speaks more tenderly about optics than about ethics. Laia sat beside Adrian and listened, heels. She had been prepared for overt hostility. What she got was subtler and more dangerous, condescension wrapped in civility. Vittorio framed the problem as concern for Adrian's judgment, not his affection, his judgment, heels. He noted that a leader burdened by emotional attachment to a vulnerable civilian with a medically fragile mother could be manipulated by competitors or investigators. He noted the public nature of the gala incident. He noted, heels, with just enough regret to sound statesmanlike, that the family's survival required discipline. Then he looked directly at Laia for the first time. Miss Hart, heels, perhaps you can help us understand whether you appreciate the complexity of the position in which my cousin has placed us all. A weaker person would have gone defensive, explained herself, apologized for existing, heels. Laia had expected to do exactly that until she heard her mother's voice in memory. Men like that smell performance, so she chose plainness, heels. I understand that my mother nearly died because the system assigned her a nurse who was not qualified to manage her treatment, she said. I understand Mr. Moretti intervened. I understand that intervention became visible, heels. I understand that visibility creates risk in your world. What I don't understand is why the burden of your internal conflict is being placed on a schoolteacher's daughter from Alexandria, as if I engineered it. The room shifted. Not much. Enough, heels. Vittorio smiled in a way that did not reach his eyes. No one is blaming you, Miss Hart. Aren't they? She asked. Because it sounds very much as if you are discussing my existence as a liability rather than your cousin's choices as your actual concern, heels. There it was, the distinction. Every manipulative structure tries to move accountability downhill, to the less powerful, to the person easiest to isolate. Education, if it means anything, should teach people to notice that movement in real time, heels. Laia had studied social work before dropping out. She knew how systems blame the nearest soft body. Hospitals do it, families do it, politicians do it, men at long tables do it. Adrian said nothing. That was deliberate, heels. If he had intervened too quickly, her authority would have vanished into his. Enzo watched her with increasing stillness. Renata looked down, one of the older men. Benedetto cleared his throat but did not speak. Vittorio tried another angle, heels. You are very articulate, Miss Hart, but this is not merely about blame. It is about suitability. Suitability for what? Laia asked. For being used? For being afraid? For having a sick parent? Those things are not moral failures where I come from, heels. That landed harder than she expected, because it introduced class without theatrics. Where I come from, not an accusation, in fact. She had spent her adult life surrounded by people for whom suffering was logistical, not shameful, heels. Neighbors borrowed folding chairs after funerals. Women brought casseroles without asking whether the recipient deserved them. Diner staff covered shifts for each other, heels. Poor communities, when not romanticized, often know something wealthy ones forget. Human dignity is not purchased by insulation. It is practiced by how one responds to weakness, heels. Laya saw then that several around the table had no language for weakness except leverage. That realization cured her of the desire to impress them. Vittorio leaned back. Let me be more direct. Heels. Do you believe you can withstand what comes with proximity to this family? No, Laya said. Absolute stillness. Because no one in full possession of reality would answer yes to that after 1 week. I don't know yet what I can withstand. Heels. I know that your cousin told me the truth when a lie would have been easier. I know he made sure my mother got competent care, and told me plainly that I did not owe him access in return. I know he gave me the chance to walk away. Heels. I know most powerful men do not give less powerful people that kind of choice. So no, I don't know what I can withstand. Heels. But I do know the difference between coercion and honesty. That was the point at which Vittorio lost the room, though not all at once. His challenge had been built on the assumption that Laya would appear dazzled, frightened, greedy, ashamed, Heels, or strategically naive. Instead, she appeared what she was, tired, observant, unseduced by wealth, and maddeningly specific. The floor under his narrative shifted. Heels. Now it looked as though the problem was not Adrian's weakness, but Vittorio's eagerness to weaponize a civilian. Enzo set down his fork. We should be careful, he said mildly, not to punish candor simply because it is inconvenient. One by one, Heels, men who had intended to remain vague began recalculating. This is how power turns, rarely through speeches, more often through changes in what becomes embarrassing to support publicly. Heels. Benedetto asked whether the family had considered that visible care for a sick woman might play better with certain legitimate stakeholders than internecine panic. Heels. Carmen, who until then had been neutral, observed that if Mr. Moretti's broader transition strategy was truly underway, then appearing capable of measured personal loyalty might actually assist rather than hinder that objective. Heels. The language remained bloodless, but the effect was real. Vittorio's mouth thinned. He moved to strike at Clast more directly. And if Miss Hart later decides she doesn't enjoy living under this kind of attention, if resentment develops, Heels. If she talks carelessly, Laya answered before Adrian could, then that would be my moral responsibility, not evidence that poor women are inherently unsuited to respect. Silence again. Heels. It is difficult to overstate how disruptive it is when someone from outside an insular power structure refuses both deference and melodrama. The room had prepared for one of those. Not neither. Adrian still said almost nothing. Heels. Once, when Vittorio's tone edged toward insult, he merely turned his head and looked at his cousin until the tone corrected itself. That was more effective than shouting. Men like Vittorio track status precisely. He heard the warning. Heels. The meeting lasted another hour, but the decisive moment had already passed. Enzo signaled for a brief recess and called Adrian into the library with 2 others. Laya remained in the dining room with Renata, who surprised her by speaking first. Heels. I thought you would come in here trying to become one of us, she said quietly. You didn't. I don't want to be one of you, Laya answered before caution could intervene. Renata actually laughed, short and bleak. Sensible. Then why are you here? Heels. Because leaving out of fear would have made your cousin's life smaller, Laya said. And because I've had enough men in institutions explain to me why a woman's pain is regrettable but strategically useful. I'm tired of that kind of room. Heels. Renata looked at her for a long moment, then down at her untouched wine. It wasn't an apology exactly, but it was an exit from opposition. When the men returned, the energy had changed permanently. The formal challenge was tabled pending further review, Heels, which translated meant dead for now. Vittorio had overplayed. Adrian remained in the chair. The exact vote count was never announced. It did not need to be. Everyone understood. On the steps outside afterward in the fading afternoon, Heels, Leia finally let herself shake. Not elegantly, not quietly, simply the body catching up. Adrian stood facing her with the composure of a man whose week had nearly detonated and had instead bent in a different direction. You did not owe me that, he said. Heels. I know, she answered. Why did you come, really? She thought about lying, about saying because it was logical, because it helped, because I'm stubborn. All partly true. Heels. Instead, because if I had stayed home and let fear make the choice, I would have hated myself. And because I believed you when you said no was real. So yes, had to be real too. Something moved across his face then, too fast to name. Gratitude, certainly, Heels. Something more vulnerable beneath it. He stepped closer. Still no touch. Not yet. Thank you, he said, and for the first time his voice roughened enough to reveal what the afternoon had cost him. Heels. There are thank yous that are transactional and thank yous that come from recognizing a person has just altered the architecture of your future. This was the second kind. Marco opened the car door. As they drove away, heels. Leia looked back once at the Chesapeake house and understood with the clarity that follows adrenaline that what had happened inside was not glamorous. It was ugly in a civilized way. Controlled humiliation attempted. Social sorting, heels. Strategic softness mistaken for weakness. The educational value of the day was sharp, heels. Rooms full of polished people are not morally safer than alleys. Sometimes they are worse because their violence can be filed, scheduled, and spoken in complete sentences. The healing value, unexpectedly, came from something else, heels. Laia had not become a different person in that room. She had remained recognizably herself. That mattered. Too many Futstri love stories confuse transformation with disappearance. This one did not need that. Heels. Her power had not come from becoming more like Adrian's world. It had come from refusing its terms without losing her own. That is harder. That is also more believable. Heels. Calmer did not mean safe. It meant the horizon stopped actively tilting for a little while. Monday, Eleanor began the proper protocol again under Dr. Rice's direction. Heels. Catalina managed schedules with military precision and grandmotherly contempt for nonsense. Bills that should have induced panic simply stopped arriving in ways Leia could not track. She objected once, sharply, and Adrian listened. Really listened. Heels. Then he told her he had set up a medical trust through a legitimate legal instrument under Eleanor's name, administered by an independent attorney who had no operational tie to him beyond fiduciary obligation. Heels. If you are going to hate me for solving things, at least hate me for solving them properly, he said. She did not hate him, but she respected that he understood the difference between generosity and control. Money is never neutral, heels. People who wield it ethically know they must design against its power to distort, heels. It was one of the first signs that Adrian might truly mean what he said about daylight. The attorney, a woman named Miriam Feld, who wore sensible heels and spoke like she had dismantled mediocre men before breakfast for 20 years, heels, walked Laia through every page. Revocable, transparent, independent oversight, tax clean. There is a form of healing in paperwork done honestly. Not poetic, real. Laia felt it. She also returned to work, heels, because dependence frightened her more than fatigue. Adrian did not argue, heels. He increased security invisibly and sent food too often until Catalina informed him through what sounded like an old family channel that if he delivered one more elaborate fruit arrangement, heels, she would return it to his office with a note recommending he date like a normal person. The result was a loaf of bread from a bakery in Georgetown and a text, olive loaf, less humiliating, heels. Laia laughed so hard in the diner break room that her coworker Tasha demanded an explanation and got only enough truth to know a man was involved, and the situation was absurd. Keep him if he makes you laugh during chemotherapy paperwork, Tasha advised. Heels. Throw him out if he starts talking like a motivational speaker. Also good advice. Their relationship, if that word could be used so early, developed in uneven, real increments. A walk at the Virginia house he had mentioned, heels, which turned out to be less mansion than refuge. Wood floors, a kitchen someone actually used, shelves with books not arranged by decorator logic, a back porch facing trees, no staff in sight, heels. He made espresso too strong for her, and eggs too carefully for someone with men on payroll. She found out he folded kitchen towels with unnecessary precision when stressed, heels. He found out she read hospital forms aloud when anxious because hearing dense language made it less capable of crushing her, heels. He told her about panic attacks in his 30s, that he had mistaken for heart problems because men in his world are taught the body may fail, but the mind may not, heels. She told him about the shame of returning to the registrar's office to withdraw from school and the deeper shame of secretly resenting her mother for getting sick at exactly the wrong time, then hating herself for the resentment. Heels. He did not flinch from that confession either. Good, he said. Means you're not a saint. Saints are no use in real life. The line would have annoyed her from someone else. From him it felt like permission to remain human under pressure. Heels. They still had not slept together. Heels. They kissed for the first time 6 weeks after the gala in the Virginia kitchen, after a terrible day at the oncology clinic, where another patient's son had shouted at a nurse, and Eleanor came home too tired to lift a mug. Heels. Laia stood at the sink trying not to cry because everyone around her kept calling her strong, and she was so sick of being assigned that job. Adrian asked if she wanted advice, comfort, or silence. She stared at him, heels, offended by the competence of the question, then said silence. He came up beside her and said nothing. After a minute she turned, put her hand on his coat, and kissed him because there are moments when a body chooses before language finishes. Heels. It was not cinematic. No wall pinning, no broken glass. Just relief and hunger, and two people trying to be gentle with something that could easily become too intense to manage. When they pulled apart, she laughed once under her breath and said, Heels. That was a terrible idea, probably, he said. Want to try another terrible idea and see if the first one improves. She did, but they moved slowly. Again, realism. Desire is not proved by recklessness. Heels. Sometimes the hottest thing an emotionally dangerous man can do is stop in time. He stopped. Heels. More than once, it made trusting him worse. Better. Both. Outside their private orbit, consequences accumulated. Vittorio did not make another open move immediately, which worried Adrian more than if he had. Quiet ops opposition is more efficient. Heels. Legitimate business partners suddenly required extra assurances. A port authority contact delayed a vote. A subcontractor with old family connections withdrew from a bid without explanation. Nothing explosive, everything expensive. Heels. Death by friction. Adrian explained enough to Leia that she understood the pattern without burdening her with operational detail. This, too, was a form of respect. Transparency does not require oversharing. Heels. It requires not making another person live inside strategic fog. One night in January, after Eleanor had fallen asleep in the recliner, and Catalina was pretending not to monitor the hallway, Leia asked the question she had been avoiding. Heels. Can people like you become good, or do you just become tired and call it reform? Heels. He leaned back in the kitchen chair, looked at the floor, and answered with the honesty she had come to trust most, because it never made him prettier. Most men in my position become sentimental before they become ethical, he said. They start donating, Heels, funding hospitals, talking about legacy. It feels cleaner than changing the machinery that profits them. I know the difference. I am trying to change the machinery. Whether that will ever make me good is not for me to decide. Heels. That answer mattered because it refused redemption as branding. So many stories lie by awarding moral cleansing to powerful men simply because they love one woman correctly for 6 months. Life does not work like that. Heels. Structures do not dissolve because a damaged man learns tenderness. If anything, tenderness raises the stakes. It gives him more to answer for. Leia understood. That was why she stayed. Not because she believed she could save him. Heels. Because he had stopped asking to be saved and started asking harder questions about repair. There is a difference. The danger around them became less immediate and more atmospheric. Security remained, though less obvious. Heels. Howard the alley cat gained weight because Marco secretly fed him tuna from the corner store. Eleanor improved enough to sit on the porch in blankets and order men twice her size to move flower pots for her. Heels. Dr. Rice allowed himself to smile occasionally. Leia took one online class in the spring, then another in summer, because a life should not collapse permanently around one season of crisis. Heels. Adrian never celebrated that in the patronizing way some men do when they fancy themselves benefactors. He only asked what textbook she needed and whether she wanted quiet while studying. The educational value of the story deepened there. Heels. Love that deserves respect expands a person's options. It does not narrow them to gratitude. Heels. That became their private test for almost everything. If his help reduced her choices, they redesigned it. If his protection began to feel like surveillance, they adjusted. If his world demanded she disappear into it, Heels, they stopped and named the demand for what it was. This did not make them conflict-free. She accused him, fairly, of speaking in partial paragraphs when stressed. He accused her, fairly, Heels, of trying to solve emotional problems by overfunctioning until she snapped. They fought once about a canceled dinner because he vanished into meetings for 12 hours and reappeared with bloodshot eyes and a half-answer about Baltimore. Heels. She told him she would not build a life around disappearing men, no matter how elegantly they returned. He apologized without self-pity. Another sign of reality. Apologies that do not include reasons tend to mean more. Heels. But the larger conflict returned in spring through a branch of the family Vittorio had not controlled fully. Renata. Heels. She requested a meeting with Leia alone, public place, afternoon. A tea room that looked offensively harmless. Adrian hated the idea, though in any way because fear cannot govern every map forever. Heels. Renata arrived without drama and got to the point within minutes. Vittorio was aligning with external partners unhappy about Adrian's transition toward legitimacy. There were funds moving, old routes reopening, pressure points being rebuilt, deals. He won't strike through you directly, Renata said. Not unless he becomes desperate. But he will try to provoke Adrian into a response that exposes how much has changed in him. Make him emotional enough and he looks weak, deals. Make him ruthless enough and he loses the Daylight Coalition. Clever, Laya said bitterly. Cowardly, Renata corrected. More accurate. Why tell me? Because you were right in that room, Renata said. We placed the burden downhill, deals. I'm tired of participating in that. This was not friendship. It was conscience under late development, deals. Still valuable. Human change often begins there, not in goodness. In fatigue with one's own compromise. The information proved useful. Adrian adjusted quietly, shifted votes, moved assets, leaned on 3 legal pressures at once, deals, and let a federal audit rumor bloom in exactly the right corridor. He never told Laya everything. He told her enough that when the next blow came, she understood why. The blow was not physical. It was public, deals. A city paper published a piece on the Moretti Philanthropic Foundation, and in the final third, deals, alluded to an unreported close association between its chairman and the daughter of a current oncology patient whose treatment had recently been assumed by a network of entities linked to the chairman's private offices. Respectable slander, deals. Not false enough to sue cleanly, ugly enough to wound. The comments gold digger, opportunist, vulnerable woman groomed by a criminal financier, monster using cancer patient for optics, deals. All available archetypes activated at once. Leia read too many of them before slamming the laptop shut. Adrian arrived at her apartment 30 minutes later looking like homicide in a cashmere coat. Do not burn down a newspaper over me, deals, she said before he opened his mouth. He almost laughed, which saved them both. I wasn't going to burn it down. I was going to buy it and make better hiring decisions. Worse, she said, funniest version of him. Most dangerous, too, deals. They sat on the floor because she did not want him pacing. This is what he wants, she said, reaction, instability. He sat with the furious stillness of a man raised to answer humiliation through force, deals. You should not have to pay this price for being near me. True, she said, but here we are. Then she said the thing he least wanted and most needed to hear. You do not get to define my dignity for me every time your world touches it, deals. I decide whether I am diminished by this, not you. Deals. That line changed something permanent between them. He saw then that protecting her could become another way of controlling the narrative if he was not careful. She saw that he was actually capable of learning the distinction mid-pain, deals. Not every man is. They weathered the article by refusing to perform victimhood or scandal. Miriam Feld issued a clean legal statement about the trust. Eleanor, to everyone's horror and delight, deals, told a local church friend that if strangers on the internet were so obsessed with her infusions, they were welcome to sit through 6-hour treatments and hold the vomit bag, deals. The church friend repeated this widely enough that it became neighborhood legend. Publicly, the story died. Privately, lines continued moving. But Adrian's internal daylight strategy was no longer hypothetical. He accelerated it, deals. That summer, he cut 2 old side routes entirely despite profit loss and brought in an outside compliance firm with enough prestige that even enemies had to treat the move seriously. Men below him complained. 1 left, 2 adapted, deals. 1 was arrested for a side hustle Adrian had quietly boxed off months earlier, such as reform in compromised systems, not revelation, pressure, sequencing, loss. The relationship survived because both kept insisting on reality, deals. When Laya visited the Virginia house in August, almost a year after Eleanor's collapse, she found Adrian in the backyard failing to repair a fence latch, deals. It was the single happiest domestic image she had ever seen in her life, and she hated him for how much. He handed her the wrong screwdriver. She corrected him. He said he preferred his women technically superior, deals. She said she preferred her men with smaller criminal portfolios. He said that was aspirational. They laughed, deals. Then Eleanor's latest scan came back improved enough to permit the word remission for the first time. Cautiously, conditionally, but still. Laya cried in the oncology parking lot. Adrian cried later in private thinking no one saw. Catalina saw, deals. Of course she saw. She handed him a handkerchief and said, "Don't become stupid just because God has decided to be generous for one afternoon." This became a family saying. Healing here was not abstract. It was scan results. Appetite returning, deals. Eleanor taking short walks. Laya reducing 1 job to 2, then 1 in classes. Adrian learning that not every crisis required a car at the curb and a man on the phone. Some required only being present while no one died. Heals. That was harder for him than strategy, which is why it mattered. Heals. Years passed in the only way believable years ever do, not as montage, as accumulation. Arguments about holiday logistics. Security protocols renegotiated every time Laia felt them tighten too close. Eleanor's health improving. Heals. Then wobbling, then improving again in uneven but merciful cycles. Coursework becoming a degree plan. Adrian's daylight project ceasing to be secret and becoming instead the primary battle line of his working life. Heals. Men who once dismissed it as sentiment realized too late that he had tied enough profit to legitimacy that opposition now threatened their own comfort. Vittorio, denied the clean overthrow he wanted. Heals. Drifted outward into alliances that exposed him. Not through dramatic betrayal at a wedding. Through financial impatience, sloppy pressure. The old world consumes itself most often by mistaking adaptation for weakness and greed for cleverness. Heals. By the time federal scrutiny landed on one of the satellite companies Vittorio had revived, Adrian's formal distance was documented, boring and legally useful. He did not smile when the summonses went out. He looked older. Heals. That is another truth stories avoid. Winning ethical ground from corrupt systems rarely makes the winner prettier. It makes them tired and not entirely forgivable. Laia finished her degree part-time over years rather than semesters, and Heals. When she walked at graduation in a borrowed black robe, Adrian stood in a field of folding chairs looking more moved than he had in boardrooms, chapel-sized ballrooms, or family tribunals. Eleanor cried without restraint. Heals. Mark clapped like a man cheering a heavyweight fight. Catalina informed everyone that the tassel was on the wrong side, and she knew because she had seen 4 grandchildren graduate and would not have standards lowered today. Heals. Laia had never liked ceremonial moments much. Heals. This one mattered because it restored continuity to a life interrupted by illness. Education had not saved her in the dramatic sense. It had not prevented poverty or cured cancer. But it returned narrative ownership. Heals. She was not only the waitress from the gala anymore, she was herself again. More herself maybe, because survival had refined rather than erased her. She went to work eventually in patient advocacy, which surprised no one who actually knew her. Heals. She understood forms, fear, appeals, the humiliation of explaining your family's finances to strangers who decide whether treatment is possible. She sat beside mothers in synthetic chairs and translated bureaucracy into plain language. Heals. She called insurers and stayed calm longer than most people could. She helped people know which words matter: experimental, medically necessary, standard of care appeal, fast-track review. Heals. Dignity sometimes looks like paperwork filed on time because no one let you face it alone. Heals. Adrian funded nothing in her office directly. They agreed on that early. He could support broader initiative elsewhere, anonymously or through structures, but her work needed to remain unshadowed by his influence. Again, Heals. Love that deserves respect expands choices without swallowing the field around them. They married quietly. Heals. Years after the Chesapeake House and long after the world had either lost interest or accepted that Adrian Moretti was a difficult man to remove and an impossible man to predict once he decided to love visibly. The ceremony was small. Heals. Eleanor well enough to attend. Catalina in dark blue and issuing instructions to florists as if born to command them. Enzo present, grave and unexpectedly gentle. Renata, too, carrying age more honestly than before. Heals. Marco in a suit that fit badly because he hated tailoring and adored them both enough to tolerate it. There were no tabloid helicopters, no 6-tier cake. Heals. Just vows spoken in a chapel on a weekday because Laia said Saturday weddings were too expensive in spirit even when not in money. Adrian laughed and agreed. Heals. He looked at her during the vows the way he had looked at her on the first porch in Alexandria, if one stripped the fear out and left the wonder. They did not promise forever in inflated language. They promised specificity, truth, choice. Heals. The right to speak when afraid. The duty not to make protection a cage. The promise not to confuse love with rescue. Experts in relationships would call those unusually sound vows given the participants. Heals. They were born from experience rather than fantasy. There were children later. One daughter first, then a son who inherited Eleanor's sarcasm and Adrian's unnerving stillness. The children knew enough and not too much. Heals. They knew their father's work had once lived in darker rooms, and that he spent much of their childhood trying to make sure it no longer did. Heals. They knew their mother had worked in hospitals and offices where people cried behind closed doors because forms were late. They knew Catalina could end any argument by entering it. Feels. They knew Howard the alley cat had long since died old and overfed and was buried under the Virginia maple with more ceremony than many men receive. They knew respect in their house was not ceremonial. It was daily, how you spoke to servers. Feels. How you listened to drivers, whether you thanked nurses by name, whether you cleaned up your own glass if you were old enough to have dropped it. Eleanor, in remission long enough to become outrageous again, Feels, taught the children card games and the difference between pity and kindness. Pity looks down, she told them. Kindness kneels. That line could stand as the moral center of the whole story if one wanted it to. Feels, because what changed everything was not that Adrian had power. Power alone had damaged plenty before her. Feels. What changed everything was the moment he chose, in a ballroom built to flatten workers into furniture, to kneel emotionally before another person's reality. To look, to respond. To do so without demanding ownership of her gratitude. Feels. The years did not erase who he had been. They did not erase the dead. They did not even erase all the compromises required to move an old machine into something less filthy. Adrian remained complicated, sometimes cold, Feels, sometimes gone too long into work, sometimes too used to command. Laia remained stubborn, morally sharp, and more capable of overfunctioning than any therapist would recommend. They remained, in other words, real, Feels. But they built a life that generated more healing than harm around them, and that is more than many stories can honestly claim. When Enzo died, Adrian sat in the Virginia kitchen long after the mourners left, hands wrapped around untouched espresso, Feels, and admitted that love had altered not his essential nature but his thresholds, Feels. Before Laia, he said, he had measured success by control, survival, and containment. After her, after Eleanor, after children, after watching a woman spend years turning bureaucratic cruelty into navigable pathways for strangers, Feels, he measured it differently, by whether those around him had become more free because he existed. It was the best sentence he ever gave her. She wrote it down later. Not because it was romantic, because it was useful, a metric, a corrective. Feels. If those around you are less free because of your love, your protection, your resources, your certainty, then something in your version of care is contaminated. She used that sentence in her work without attribution. It helped people, Feels. On a winter evening many years after the gala, when their daughter was in college and their son had taken the train back to the city, Adrian and Laia stood on the Virginia porch wrapped in old coats while snow began to stitch the yard in white. Feels. He had more gray at the temples now. Feels. She had a line between her brows from years of concentration and compassion. Inside, the house held the ordinary sounds of a long marriage. A pan cooling on the stove, a lamp left on in the hall, Feels. A book face down where one of them would pretend to return to it. Do you ever think about that night? He asked. Which part? She said. The porch, the house on Chesapeake, the stupid pastries. She laughed. Mostly the pastries. Good, he said. Feels. They were excellent pastries. They stood quietly for a while. Then she answered the real question. Yes. I think about the fact that if the nurse had been properly trained, if the insurer had approved the treatment, Feels. If the agency had paid enough to hire qualified oncology staff, if the hospital had assigned a navigator sooner, if any number of ordinary systems had functioned as promised, I might never have met you. And do you wish they had? He asked. Feels. That's not a fair question. I know. She turned to look at him. No, I don't wish it. Feels. But I do wish the world had been kinder without requiring you. That landed in him exactly where it should have. Because the story had never really been about the superiority of private power. Feels. It had been about the tragedy that private power was faster than public care. A realistic telling must preserve that wound, he nodded. Me too, he said. After a minute, he added, You know what still haunts me most? Not Chesapeake, not Vittorio, Feels. Not even the gala. The nurse on the porch smoking while your mother reacted inside. Because she wasn't evil. She was just in a system that made negligence ordinary. Laia rested her head lightly against his shoulder. Yes, she said. Feels. That's the part people miss. Monsters are easy. Rot is harder. Snow gathered on the railing. Somewhere a plow moved faintly on the road. Feels. Inside, Catalina, older now but apparently immortal, called from the kitchen that if they both caught pneumonia after all these years of expensive medical drama, she would bury them separately out of spite. They laughed, went inside, Feels, and shut the door on the cold. That is where the story properly ends. Not with conquest, not with purity, not with a man redeemed by desire or a woman elevated by proximity to danger. It ends with people who learned imperfectly and at cost heals. That respect is more transformative than glamour. That truthful care heals more than dramatic rescue. And that love worthy of adulthood must leave each person more human, not less. The waitress remained a woman with a profession, a mind, heals, and a moral center. The Mafia heir remained a man responsible for the damage of his inheritance even while he fought to alter its direction, heals. Their improbable meeting became plausible because every piece beneath it was real. Institutional failure, class difference, the seduction of relief, the discipline of boundaries, the politics of visibility, the way power tries to move blame downward, heals. The way honest attention can interrupt a life at exactly the moment a person has forgotten she is allowed to need help. If there is a final lesson in it, it is not that dangerous men become safe when they fall in love. They do not, heals. It is that people become most worth loving when they stop using care as ownership and start treating another person's dignity as sacred, even when fear, class, habit, and power invite them not to. That can happen in a ballroom, in a hospital parking lot, heals. In a kitchen, on a porch. It can happen wherever one human being fully sees another and says, without performance, I will not let your pain be the price of my convenience. The rest is consequence. The rest is work, heals. The rest, if one is lucky and disciplined and honest enough, becomes a life.